Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me and Lee Hughes for this morning's session. I'm excited to get started. Also, thank you to everybody that's shown so much support since we started doing these webinars. This is number 21. I can hardly believe it. I think we've had over 1,000 people tune in and watch our webinars each week. So we're really, really grateful for that. And for this morning's session, we are looking at onboarding and pre-screening. Now, today's session is very much about the compliance elements of onboarding. We've run previous sessions to talk about the more softer sides of things in terms of getting context, culture, engagement from new hires. And by all means, go back and look at our previous sessions for that. But this morning is very specifically around compliance. Now, I'm really, really happy that Lee Hughes, the sales director at GB Group, our trusted partner, is joining us this morning. We've been working with GB Group for a number of years now. And during COVID, they've been a fantastic support for a couple of our clients that have been needing to scale very quickly for some critical hiring campaigns, specifically around COVID. So I'm grateful to Lee for joining us this morning. And with that, I'm going to invite Lee on now. We are not just live here on Crowdcast, we're also live on LinkedIn, Twitter and YouTube. So welcome to anybody viewing on those platforms as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to find and invite Lee on. Just scrolling through. Right, okay, Lee, I'm inviting you on now. I'm going to grab a quick slurp of coffee just while Lee's joining us and we'll get started. What I will say is if you've got any questions at all, do feel free to either post them in the chat bit or elsewhere. So yeah, feel free to do that.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Morning, Giles. Morning, everyone.
Thank you very, very much for taking time out of your busy week to come and join us for this morning session. Just for everybody's benefit, would you like to give everybody a quick introduction?
Yes, so thank you for joining, everybody. I'm sales director at GBG. I've been in GBG for almost 9 years now, and my responsibility is supporting organisations who are basically recruiting and vetting candidates through providing data and technology services. Obviously, we have a number of partners. And we are thankful to work with Jobtrain and look forward to doing a lot more in the future. So yes, my remit is really customer success, customer service, and making sure that we are, helping organisations with the challenges that they're facing around onboarding and vetting new people.
So onboarding has been a perennial challenge in a number of ways. Velocity and making sure we don't lose people in the process is really important, but we've got to stick by and recognise the pretty significant compliance requirements around onboarding to make sure we're doing all those things right. And when you and I sat down to talk about sort of sketching out this session this morning, you revealed to me quite a number of different recent changes in legislation to make onboarding and compliance checks a little bit more straightforward, especially now we're living in this virtual world. And I think we've just gone through our first virtual onboarding process with a new hire. So I think we're learning as much as everybody else is. But we've got a few key areas that we're going to go through this morning. I've got a little crib sheet here. So the first area we'll cover is remote onboarding and vetting. Then we'll look at pre-employment checking, and then we'll look at the digitization of hiring and how that's changing in terms of government guidelines and that kind of thing as well. So if we start with remote onboarding and vetting, what does that look like at the moment? How has that been impacted through COVID, and how are hiring managers having to adapt in terms of their way of working?
Yeah, good question. And I think what we've seen across our range of customers is a lot of reliance on remote interviewing, video interviewing, webinars like this, psychometric testing that's done remotely. Obviously, platforms and services like yours, where a lot of onboarding and talent attraction is done remotely. And actually, what tended to happen pre-COVID, not all the time, but a lot of the time, is that the vetting and actually ensuring people are who they say they are and looking at their background history, etc., would potentially be done at the point of which you're bringing someone into the organization physically.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more reliance now on doing that remotely, but doing it earlier using technology. So I think the ways that customers and organizations are adapting is obviously trying, and then the balance they're trying to get is that balance between keeping the compliance, which you mentioned earlier, making sure there's a robust process in place, whilst doing that, potentially not seeing the person at all until the day they start. And in some cases, and we've had experience of this, we had a new starter ourselves that we never saw. Well, we saw once physically in an interview, but she actually started a couple of months later on, and the whole onboarding process was remote. All the vetting was remote, all the training and induction was remote, and we had to adapt to that.
How did you find that experience, given that it was probably the first time that you'd done it, and were any specific learnings that came out of that?
Yeah, I think for the business it was actually relatively straightforward, because obviously we've got the technology and we've got the infrastructure. I think it's probably more challenging for the candidate because they're not used to that type of initial engagement with a new organization, and they don't get to create that network and bond with the people. But I think the fact that our business are using Teams as an example, and the fact that we use our own software, as you'd imagine, for vetting, we're able to do a lot of things quickly and efficiently that make processes like that easier. And a lot of our customers and organizations are doing the same. So it's tricky, but I think organizations have been able to adapt quite quickly to it.
Yeah, for sure. We've all been on a pretty steep learning curve over the last few months. But there are, despite all the huge negatives, there are certainly positives to be taken from it. And using technology in new and inventive ways has been certainly one of those. And if we look at velocity around onboarding, tech can really help us to move that process along with purpose, but still with one eye on the all-important compliance element of it. Yeah. Now, there have been some changes or some relaxation in the rules around things like ID verification and that kind of thing. I think people would probably be really interested to learn more about that and how they can apply it. Yeah,
so quite early after lockdown in March, April time, I think the first organisation to do this, not for actually pre-employment purposes, but more from consumer purposes, were the Financial Conduct Authority. There's some quite robust criteria that they have to go through to bring a consumer on board and be able to transact with them. And one of those criteria is they need to verify their identity. So they have to check their name, date of birth and address, and make sure that person's actually got a footprint in society. And often that is done either as a face-to-face interaction using documents, or it can be done electronically using data and obviously software services. But what the FCA did was allowed organisations to relax the criteria slightly. And what followed was the Disclosure and Barring Service, who obviously manage criminal record checking in England and Wales, and the Home Office for more of a right to work angle. They followed quite shortly after and enabled organisations and hiring managers to verify someone's identity as part of those two checking processes remotely. So you no longer need to see the person face to face, see their original document, which might be a passport or a biometric residency permit or a visa, and see it with the person in front of you. You now have the option of showing a document to someone like this, or sending an electronic scan or copy over. So I think certainly with our customers, and we work with a lot of customers in the sporting world that bring on volunteer coaches, work with the NHS, education, universities, gig economy organisations that are delivering goods through COVID more and more now. And it raised a lot of questions. It threw up a lot of questions about how compliant is this? You know, I'm used to seeing the person,
absolutely,
used to seeing the original document, and now I feel a bit blind to that. Now the relaxation of the rules almost allows for a little bit of leniency in relation to what's expected of you as a hiring manager, in terms of verifying a document and making sure it belongs to the person. But the key part about the rules is you still, you know, if you're doing a right to work check, or you're doing an identity check as part of a criminal record checking process, you know, you still need to see that person, and you still need to see those documents when they finally come and start with you and actually are physically in your presence. So it's not don't do it. It's just for now you can do it this way.
Yeah, I was thinking my next question actually is this just for now scenario because we are in COVID and various states of lockdown up and down the country?
It
do you
is.
see that being a longer term change?
So yes, on both counts really. I don't think there is much appetite for those organisations to roll back to what we had before, which was a face-to-face checking procedure with original documentation. There is genuine desire now in government, which I know we will go on to talk about, to roll forward to a more digital, remote way of doing things. And as we've now heard from Boris earlier in the week, you know, we're likely to be in this for a bit longer than we hoped.
It's a pretty understatement. I think it's going to be next year, isn't it? Yeah.
So I think, you know, the government really need to come up with a tangible solution that if this does go on longer than even Christmas or beyond, that there are some compliant and technological solutions that enable organizations to do ID checking and vetting really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a pragmatic solution to me, and hopefully for people joining us this morning on this session, it'll give them a bit more confidence in terms of that they are compliant in terms of following those processes and things. If we move on to look at pre-employment checking, there's a plethora of different checks. I'm aware of that, but perhaps not everybody else is. But what kind of checks are available now to support organizations that are vetting remotely?
Yeah, good question. I think the market has generally noticed an increase in the demand for basic criminal record checks. I think there is a general movement across all markets that if you're not in a regulated role, a teacher or a nurse or someone that's responsible for or working with vulnerable adults or children, that it is now best practice to actually look at a person's background and get a feel for their background history. And I think through COVID that's become more relevant because e-commerce has increased. So the more you can't go and do things, the more you have to rely on buying things and getting things delivered online. Mm-hmm. Obviously you're delivering goods to vulnerable people. There needs to be some assurance that those people you're sending out to your consumers can be trusted and are can drive the vehicle and they haven't stolen things before, and they're not in a position where actually they're inappropriate for what they're doing.
In terms of perhaps being vulnerable because they've got adverse financial history, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, if there is theft, on someone's disclosure, or they have 9 points on a driving license. They may not be appropriate in the current climate or at all to be delivering goods to someone's front door, and that person might be vulnerable or elderly. And more we're finding that those kind of organizations in those markets are really looking to get more confidence about the people they're bringing on. So there's a lot more of criminal record checking going on. But I think broadly, identity is really at the forefront of a pre-employment checking package. I think a lot of people want to know very early, potentially before they've even brought an applicant on, whether that person is who they say they are.
Yeah. And how is that best established?
Yeah, so like we said, there are manual ways of verifying a person's identity using documents, but also a lot more organisations are now starting to rely on data. So, I live in North Wales. I have a date of birth. I have an address. There are ways to verify that I have a footprint in society. So I might be on the edited electoral roll. I might be on a credit header bureau database. I might be on a marketing retail database. And if you can get confidence that, I am the Lee Hughes that lives in North Wales with that date of birth, it just gives you confidence early before you commit more to that person through the interview process. Okay, this is a real person, and we can move on through the process. And then I think the other types of checks that tend to happen, Giles, are probably come closer to when a person is starting a role. Obviously, right to work, you need to do before the person starts on the day of their first day of employment. So that's very important, and every organisation has to have a statutory excuse to make sure that they don't get penalised by fines by the government for having illegal workers. And then, depending upon the role that you're recruiting for, you might do basic, standard, or enhanced criminal record checks, depending what kind of activity the person's doing. That you would have to do in regulated roles. Again, you mentioned adverse finance there. If you've got someone working in a finance department, or let's say someone working in a car retail environment who are collecting cash deposits, you might want some confidence that that person can manage their own financial environment before you let them work in your organisation. And then, of course, is referencing driving license checking if you're driving buses or delivery vehicles, and there's a lot more of that happening at the moment. So there's a range out there that that you can choose from, and I think what we're finding now is organisations are really relying on being able to get access to those checks via technology to use remotely.
Yeah. We've got a question from Polly. Polly, thanks for your question. How do you check right to work remotely? Okay.
So really, really, really good question. So pre-COVID, you couldn't. Yeah. So it is a face-to-face interaction where you have to see the person with the original documentation. As per the Home Office's relaxed guidance, just after COVID, you are now able to see a person in this environment with a document on camera, or ideally an electronic scan, or both. So what we're finding with our customers is that they're going through that process, and some are finding it more difficult because the document may be fuzzy on the screen, my face may be fuzzy, but that is one way you can do it. The key thing, though, is when you do, when the person does physically start with you, if you can, you should see that person with the originals at that time. But to get them onboarded, they're now enabling you to do that in a remote fashion. And I think the other way that organizations are now looking at is through kind of mobile app-based technology or software, because essentially, right to work, as Polly may well know, is a procedure where you capture documents, you review them, and you store them for an audit trail, and then you monitor that person's through the life cycle of their employment with you. And there is technology now which enables you to capture, validate documents, tick the Home Office key questions that you need to tick to meet their criteria around right to work, and then store those documents in the cloud and be able to access them. So we're seeing a lot more organisations now relying on that type of technology to do right to work.
I can see how that would be quite popular, because I might be left with a little bit of nervousness in terms of, I don't even know, I mean, if I was recruiting and somebody's holding up their ID to the screen, whether they get a screen grab or collect that in some way. But I guess to get that absolute confidence, then using that kind of tech is going to be probably quite attractive to me. And we shouldn't be shy about saying here that GB Group have got some fantastic tech around doing the ID verification piece as well. And that probably sort of leads on to, you might be feeling quite overwhelmed of like, all these different checks I can do, whether it's adverse financial history or qualifications, driving license, those kinds of things. They are all available to be managed remotely via technology, aren't they?
Yes, yeah, and more now, some of the trickier types of vetting checks that would typically be done in-house, like referencing and qualification referencing, can be done via technological solutions, whereby you're using a platform and you're using outsourced services or data to go and obtain that information, essentially making it more efficient and quick for the hiring organization.
Yeah, for sure.
So yes, yeah.
And in terms of sort of our own recruitment platform and how that interacts with, GBG, for clients of ours that want to be running DBS checks and that kind of thing, then that can actually be instigated within the Jobtrain platform. Invitations sent to the new hire. They complete all their information around DBS online, and Jobtrain will actually provide updates in real time in terms of how that application is progressing, whether there are any specific issues around it and that kind of thing. So to provide a bit of context in terms of how pre-employment screening or DBS checking will work with the recruitment platform, there's one example there. The government are looking to embrace digital a lot more, Lee. How are they doing that to support digital verification and vetting, and what changes are sort of coming down the line?
Yeah, so I think it starts with what we talked about earlier, which is the relaxation of the rules, and not rolling back to what happened before, but looking forward. And there are numerous parts to government, as we know. There's the Home Office, there's a DBS, which are a government department, which is related. There's the DVLA, which is a government department, but there's also the government digital service, GDS, and they have a project around digital identity. People that are familiar with what government are doing may remember something called gov.verify from a few years ago, which was the government's drive to give citizens essentially a digital identity passport, where you have your identity verified via organizations like GBG, and you store that and take that with you in order to access government services. For lots of reasons, that didn't take off and didn't do very well, and I think cost the government quite a lot. And that's being completely shut down, and they're looking at an alternative way of doing it. And essentially, they're looking at a framework of how organizations can use digital identity and how government can use digital identity in a compliant way, and create some criteria and a framework for the kind of minimum level of assurance that you need to have of a person's identity. And then organizations can go and use, again, organizations like GBG, to verify a candidate's identity using data and documents through a technological channel. And I think that so there's a general movement towards this from government, and then there's obviously sub-government departments, if I can call them that, or other government departments which are at the forefront of wanting to implement this quite early, and DBS and the Home Office are obviously two of those.
Yeah, when you say quite early, what kind of timescales are we looking at? Because I can see definite benefits to that in terms of massively short-circuiting the process of ID verification and right to work and all those types of things. Perhaps there might be a slight nervousness around candidates or individuals about how much information is being held on another system, albeit by the government. But this sounds to me like for employers, it could be a really positive step forward. But as ever, sometimes with government, it takes a little while to deliver these things. So it's quite interesting to see what the timescales look like.
Yeah, I hope you wouldn't ask me that question. Seeing that you have, I'll give you a politician's answer.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't really know. I think that there's a desire, and again, these are just rumours and through the grapevine, but there's a desire, I think, definitely within the next 6 to 12 months that something can be introduced. The project is started. There are papers you can look at online, and there is things you can view online. And I think obviously because Brexit's come in, there's a desire to make sure that right to work processes are easier to manage. Then, 6 to 9 months would be my guess. But as you just said, that can change with government departments. So I don't know. But what we do know is that the organisations are starting to leverage this technology anyway in order to meet the challenges they're facing in terms of onboarding. Mm-hmm. But once the government give it the green light and the stamp across all of the types of services you would need it for, then it just becomes a real no-brainer for the user, for the customer, and for the applicant to do it that way. Great,
that's been really helpful. So for those that are viewing today, if you were to, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, but if there's sort of some key takeaways, perhaps like a top 3 in terms of what people should be considering or should be doing right now, what would you suggest to make sure they're feeling confident and compliant about bringing new hires on board and into their organisations?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so I think the first one is compliance. Whatever you are doing and whatever you either want to do from a best practice point of view, mm-hmm. or you have to do because the role you're recruiting, it means you have to do something. So if we've got people on from the NHS, bringing on doctors, that they'll need to do an enhanced DBS check, as an example. They'll need to do right to work. They might need to do an overseas criminal record check because the doctor has lived overseas in the last 5 years. Yeah. They may want to have extra confidence. So it's about knowing what you need to do for each role and making sure that from a compliance point of view, you feel confident that what you're doing is robust. And I think secondly, it's about understanding how from a process and technology point of view, you make things more efficient. I think what we're finding through COVID is organisations need to reduce costs. They need to make processes more effective, efficient. They need to streamline, essentially, and obviously using data and technology can help you do that, and not relying on manual processes. And then I think thirdly, it's probably about making sure that keeping an eye on what we've talked about in relation to what government are doing and how that can help and support you as a hiring manager and a hiring organisation, and how you can weave that into the way that you onboard and vet your people. And I think what the government are aiming to do is make this easier for everyone. So it's all about the user journey and it's all about the applicant journey. And actually, what we hear a lot from our customers at the moment is the easier they can make the journey for the applicant, the more chance they've got of obtaining that applicant from a competitive organisation or another organisation.
Yeah, a very fair point. Yeah. Too often we hear that the organisations who have quite a slow onboarding process or quite manual that takes time, you end up losing people. So you've invested time in advertising, in reviewing applications, interviewing, and then starting the vetting and onboarding process. And there is a significant investment there. And then you potentially might run the risk of losing people if you're not onboarding with velocity, with positive communication, feedback to the applicants so they know exactly where they're up to in the process. But equally, if you hire the wrong person in your organisation, or they haven't got right to work and that kind of thing, the penalties can be pretty significant. And then you've got to start the whole process all over again. So I think that the benefits of using data more, the benefits of using digital a lot more in terms of onboarding and vetting is, it's a pretty clear case for that, I would have thought. And Lee, I've got to thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been really interesting. I've learned an awful lot. I hope you have too, everybody that's joined us this morning. And Lee, if people wanted to contact you directly, I popped your LinkedIn profile in the chat there, but how do people get hold of you?
That's perfect. Yeah, please connect with me. Let me know on the in-mail that you've been on this, and happy to connect and help and support wherever I can.
Great.
Thanks for having me on.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time this morning, taking time out of your day to join Lee and I for this morning's session. We're going to take a week off next week for our webinar series, but we'll be coming back with more sessions very soon. We've got a library now, thanks to Lee, of 21 other sessions that you can pick up and view whenever you like. So it's almost like Netflix for the HR and TA industry. Get stuck in, and there's some really good content on there. We hope you get value from it. We hope you got value from today's session. And thank you very much, and I hope you'll have a great week. Thanks, Lee. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers. Bye now.